comment,
and subscribe for more content.
Where's the notification bell?
It's to the right of you.
Oh.
Do 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 do. What's up, guys? Welcome to this very special fandom-related podcast edition of a Funko Podcast. I am DK Wrestler.
And I am MD Shady.
And of course, if you guys didn't recognize that song at the beginning, I was trying to attempt the Crash Bandicoot theme song, of course, because if I actually put the actual song, we'd be slapped with copyrights. So might as well do that. But anyways, like I just mentioned, today we have what is actually our 11th fandom-related podcast we've done in a Funko Podcast history. And this one I am most excited about for the year of 2021. Actually, I've been looking forward to this one. And that is the podcast more specifically titled It's Insanity, the Crash Bandicoot podcast, which of course we are going to be talking about the game series overall for Crash Bandicoot, the Funko Pops involved in the set, which there's actually only 16 of them, surprisingly, as we are recording this podcast, which of course I think, if I'm not mistaken, when this podcast releases, I think it's during the week that usually New York Comic-Con exclusives get announced. So I wouldn't be surprised if potentially there would be another Crash Bandicoot exclusive that we'd miss talking about. But of course, like usual, we will talk about our early memories of playing Crash Bandicoot. I don't know if you want to start first or I should start first.
I suppose I could start first. I love Crash Bandicoot so much. First of all, I guess I'll start with saying that the first ever game and my favorite Crash game is the Wrath of Cortex. I just loved playing that game as a kid on the original Xbox. And I don't know, I feel like the levels were pretty dynamic. There was a lot of differences to each one, where there are some Crash games which are pretty similar. Another early memory I have with Crash is those. I actually have a full set of them. If you guys remember the McDonald's toys that had come out back in, I want to say 2002, it might have been 2003, which were like little handheld games, sort of. And those were really awesome. And I'm glad to own a full set of those. I don't know. I just loved the character so much. I loved playing the games, considering I only really owned Wrath of Cortex as a kid and Twin Sanity. I loved going over to, let's say, a friend's house who owned a PlayStation where I had an Xbox, and then I'd play the original games. And that was just so changing for me to switch from Wrath of Cortex and Twin Sanity over to the original few games.
Crash Bandicoot has pretty much been there my entire life. I remember my brother and I, we had a PlayStation 1 as kids, and I remember we basically played the same 4 games out of like the 20 we had, which was like Twisted Metal 4, Gran Turismo 2. There was like a BMX, like motocross game, I guess there was. And then there was Crash Bandicoot. I'm pretty sure it was 2 that I had, which we will be talking about on today's podcast. And I think that's because I remember the loading screen where it's kind of like, I almost want to say it is not a time warp, but like a time portal, I guess. And you just stand on it and like it brings you up different levels of where the different levels are, like different, you know what I'm saying. But I'm pretty sure it was Crash Bandicoot 2 that we played, because I also remember the cover very well with Crash and Neo Cortex on the cover. And I enjoyed that. And of course, I loved playing number 1. We might as well kick off by talking about the very first Crash Bandicoot game, September 9th, 1996, already pretty much 25 years old as this podcast gets released. Released by Naughty Dog as the publisher or developer on the PlayStation. And of course, like the majority of Crash Bandicoot games, it is a platform game and it was single player. Now, all of the, I guess, summaries / plots for these games are basically, I'll admit, they're kind of copied over from IMDb or like the Crash Bandicoot Wikipedia, known as Bandipedia. So for number 1, Crash Bandicoot is being experimented on by Dr. Neo Cortex and his assistant, Dr. Nitrous Brio. Dr. Neo Cortex is created an animal army from enslaved animals across the Wampa Islands. After the experiment with Crash fails, Crash escapes and resolves to save his captured girlfriend and fellow Bandicoot, Tana.
The game is amazing. I mean, for a game that old and kind of a form of video game that is so different from anything that anyone had really seen previous, like graphic wise, it did a really good job. And even though it's not the greatest looking nowadays, I think it still holds up and it's really fun to play. It's a little bit of a tough game, obviously, because the Crash series isn't the easiest, that's for sure. But I mean, just a gorgeous game and a lot of gorgeous levels as well.
Yeah, Crash Bandicoot 1, it has that mix of it's fun, but it's also difficult at the same time. I remember replaying it, I think years ago when I had bought the Insane trilogy, which is what I've been playing recently because I don't have a PlayStation 1 anymore and can't play it on there. A lot of updated graphics compared to what Crash looked like 25 years ago, which is just insane. I feel like any of the levels from the first half of the game are just so cool, including what pretty much a lot of people would remember as one of their favorite levels is Insanity Beach. And there are some levels that are really frustrating, but fun at the same time. And I know a lot of people aren't going to agree with me, but anyone who remembers the levels Road to Nowhere and the High Road know how difficult that level is with the bridge that kind of breaks on certain pieces. A really frustrating level, and I think everyone can agree with me, is the slippery climb. But anyways, we're going to talk about the Funko Pops involved essentially for this first game, which there's quite a bit. It's going to be the most out of all of them. Kicking off is, of course, the regular Crash Bandicoot Pop, which, of course, Crash Bandicoot, the main protagonist of the series. He's an Eastern Barred Bandicoot living in Insanity Island, who is captured and evolved by Dr. Neo Cortex, and Crash is often accompanied by his ally, Aku Aku. Then we got ourselves the black and white 1 in 6 chase variant of Crash Bandicoot, the flocked variant that was exclusive to EB Games here in Canada and GameStop in the US, a glow in the dark version that was exclusive to Best Buy. And then from one of the more recent waves, we have spinning Crash Bandicoot. And then we have ourselves, of course, Aku Aku, like I mentioned, which, of course, is a witch doctor spirit living inside of a wooden mask who guides Crash and his friends as they defeat the forces of evil. In most platforming Crash games, if 3 masks are found, Crash becomes invincible for a limited amount of time, with Aku Aku being placed on Crash's face during this period. And then, of course, the last pop to talk about for this game more specifically is, of course, Dr. Neo Cortex, the main antagonist of the series. Born in Illinois, he is a professional evil scientist bent on world dominance. He is best known as the creator of his arch nemesis, Crash Bandicoot. Cortex is usually the final boss of the games he is in, with a handful of exceptions. The Crash Pops, at least the regular ones I'll talk about, are pretty decent. I like the whole design of Crash Bandicoot in pop form. These were released, I believe, in 2017, which is kind of what I always say is that year where Funko decided to kind of update not only the detail, but kind of like posing and just different things that they do with Funko Pops that you see nowadays. And the original Crash is awesome. And we've mentioned a bunch of times on either the podcast or in videos that for some reason, when the flocked version came out and we had the regular version, that I thought the regular version was cooler. And then I skipped out on the flocked version. And then only recently did I finally get that flocked version, which I don't know why I didn't get it at retail when it first came out. Stupid of me, essentially. But either way, regular version is cool. The black and white version, I don't exactly know if they decided let's make it just for a random chase or it has to do something with the game. I can't exactly remember. The flocked version, of course, awesome. I'm glad that I finally own it. The colors look really nice in flocked form. The glow in the dark Best Buy exclusive. This is also on the same boat as the black and white chase. Did we really need a glow in the dark version? When has Crash really glown in the dark? Unless it was maybe in one of the games we aren't talking about, but I just threw it in the first game. It's still cool. I like it because I tried out the glow and it's not that, I guess, orangey brown color. It actually glows green when it glows in the dark, which I think is pretty unique. You wouldn't really expect it from this pop, especially in the glam shot we're looking at. Spinning Crash is awesome. This might have to be my favorite, like, I guess, Crash Pops out of the ones we're talking about right now, just because that's pretty much a huge part in Crash Bandicoot. You have Crash spin and then you collect the apples in order to gain health. It's really cool. They did a pretty decent job at the whole spinning effect and how you can kind of see 4 feet because, of course, like you're spinning around, you're kind of seeing a tornado-esque effect there. And he's got his tongue sticking out, which is really, really cool. Aku Aku, I remember when the first wave of Crash Bandicoot pops came out, and I was like, man, how cool would it be if we get a Aku Aku Funko Pop? I feel like it was like the next year after these released. Then that wave came out and Aku Aku was a part of it. And this is actually pretty decent in Funko Pop form. They pretty much nailed it to what the actual character looks like, not in Funko Pop form. And I like the white eyes with kind of like the green on the outside there. I really like it. Of course, you got the 4 different color leaves there and just everything they did with this pop, even though it is a very thin Funko Pop. It's like if anyone has the Toy Story 4 pops and you have Forky and how thin that is, that's pretty much the same thing going on. But it's still cool that Aku Aku gets like his own Funko Pop, and it's not like, let's say you did a Crash Bandicoot and then it came with like a pop and buddy of sorts with Aku Aku where it was tiny. I like the idea of Aku Aku actually getting his own pop. Dr. Neo Cortex. I really enjoyed this Funko Pop. I think they did a decent job on this with the way they did the hair. And I like the way they did the eyes, where it's not only black, but you've got the red on the outside there. I think it's really cool. And it has a mouth, which is really, really cool. I mean, Crash has the mouth too. That's pretty much the whole thing about Crash is his facial expressions throughout the video game series. And Neo Cortex also has some pretty good facial expressions, whether he's happy or he's angry or he's diabolical there. Really, really awesome that they pulled this pop off.
So the first thing I'm going to say is that, yes, every pop in this set has a mouth, which I think goes a long way with why it's so great compared to some of the other sets, I guess you could say, for Funko Pops. And like, I don't know, obviously that's kind of the thing with Funko is that they don't have a mouth and that a lot of them don't need it. But I feel like with these characters, they definitely do need the mouths. And I'm glad they went down that route because this set is just amazing. Starting off with the OG common Crash Bandicoot. This is a pop I actually don't own because I went for the flocked one. The Chase Crash Bandicoot, it's pretty cool, but yeah, I don't really understand why there's the black and white. The only thing I could think of is if maybe the color goes out on your TV and then you're playing it in black and white. But obviously, I think they did it just to kind of make a Chase version. Then there's that flocked one, and I love this pop so much. I definitely knew I had to get it when it came out because flocking was a neat idea, and I believe this was most likely my first ever flocked pop. The glow in the dark one is another one that I do not own, but I really want to get my hands on. It is cool that it glows in the dark green rather than orange because obviously it would glow a little better. But I'm not really sure either why we needed a glow in the dark one, but I'm also pretty glad we have it because it just makes the set a little more dynamic. Then we have the spinning Crash, and this is done pretty well. I really enjoy this pop. And yeah, of course, like that's one of the main things that Crash does is do his kind of spin kick thing. And he definitely does not collect apples, he collects Wumpa fruit. And then we have Aku Aku, and this is a really great pop. I really like this pop so much that I actually own 2 of them. One that I took out of box to display with a NECA Crash figure that I have because I feel like it was just like DK had said, it looks so close to actual Aku Aku that you can't really tell that it's a pop, especially when you put it next to that figure that I have of Crash. I sometimes forget that it's even a pop, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. And then we have Neo Cortex, and this pop turned out really well. I really enjoy the route that Funko kind of went with this pop. It makes it look like a pop, but it also doesn't look terrible for a character that kind of has a little bit of a weird head shape, I guess you could say. And this is one of those pops where it's posed really, really well. And it's one of the first times that we were seeing pops that were just such a great pose.
All right, so I guess it's now time to move on to the second game we're going to be talking about, which of course is Crash Bandicoot 2 Cortex Strikes Back, which was released October 31st, so Halloween of 1997, so just over a year after the release of the first game. Of course, it was released by Naughty Dog on the PlayStation, which, like the other Crash Bandicoot game, it is a platform game and it's single player. Crash Bandicoot is abducted by Dr. Neo Cortex, who has apparently turned over a new leaf and is now willing to save the world. Crash is then thrust into several parts of the islands in order to gather crystals and allow Cortex to contain the power of the upcoming planetary alignment and keep the planet from being destroyed. He is joined by Coco Bandicoot, his sister, who is suspicious of Cortex's true intentions. Dr. Nitrous Brio, who has a personal vendetta against Cortex, tries to convince Crash to gather gems instead of crystals in hopes of destroying his archenemy Cortex, and sends his own henchmen to stop the Bandicoot's progress.
First thing I have to say about number two is this is definitely the first game that I played that I didn't own. Like I said, where I had Wrath of Cortex and I had Twin Sanity or whatever other game on the Xbox. But when I went over to my one kind of family friend's house and they had the PlayStation, this is definitely the first Crash game that I played, which was kind of out of my knowledge, I guess you could say, when I was a kid. And this game's great. I love that one level where I forget what it's called, but basically you're on the ice, I think it is, and there's like seals, I think they are, that go like each way through the lane and you kind of have to avoid them. I loved the levels like that. This game was awesome. And obviously the introduction to Coco Bandicoot was really cool as well.
I remember, like I mentioned, as a kid playing this, but replaying it recently, I didn't even realize how truly difficult this game was. Playing this game was the opposite of what I said on our last fandom related podcast about Sonic 1 and then Sonic 2, where I felt like the first game, it was difficult, but it was fun most of the time. But then they went backwards and was like, let's make it difficult to the point where we just want you to rage quit. And I felt like throughout the majority of the game, that's what it was. And especially with the introduction of Nitro boxes are a pain in the butt because, of course, you can't touch Nitro boxes or else you die. It's not like a TNT box where you can just jump on it and you got 3 seconds to move away from it before it explodes. I enjoyed the main menu, which is the warp room. That's what it's called. I had it written down here on my notes here. The warp room is what I meant to say earlier, where it's different floors and then you jump into the portals to get to the levels. Yes, the polar bear riding levels, which involve ice and you slide on it. And then, yeah, the seals coming down the hill there. Those were pretty much the fun parts, I guess, of number two. Otherwise, I find that the rest of the game was so difficult to do and really made me almost want to quit playing the game. But I do like the polar bear riding levels much better than the hog riding levels from the very first Crash Bandicoot game. Another thing that I don't like about the game, and I think really, I guess, kills the mood for me, is that I feel like the title of the game and the first cutscene ruins the whole storyline of the game. Because you already know before playing that Cortex wants to destroy the world. Had they cut out both Cortex Strikes Back from the title and not shown the cutscene at the beginning of the game, that it would give a little suspense for the player, like making fans think, has Cortex really turned a new leaf? And you thought that like Cortex is now good instead of already knowing beforehand Cortex is going to screw you over at some point in this game. But I'm going to talk about the Funko Pops now for this game, which there are only 3 that I felt went well with this game. With the first one being the Jetpack Crash Bandicoot. That was a Toys R Us exclusive, which of course, Crash Bandicoot is seen with the jetpack in 2 levels during the game, but also in the final boss battle against Dr. Neo Cortex. Coco Bandicoot, which of course is a reoccurring character in the Crash Bandicoot series and is highly intelligent, cute, and spirited young sister of Crash Bandicoot. Just like her brother, Coco was an ordinary Eastern Barred Bandicoot until she was taken from the jungle and genetically enhanced by Nitrous Brio and Neo Cortex, then later escaped on her own. She often aids Crash by using her computer hacking techniques to assist him, building gadgets ideal for the situation, or even tagging along with him in his journeys using self-taught martial arts to defend herself. And then the last pop to discuss about for this game is Tiny Tiger, which is a Thailancine with an ironic name initially created by Nitrous Brio. He is often seen working for Neo Cortex, the main antagonist of the series, and is arguably the most loyal animal minion. In most games, Tiny is essentially the more rampaging, bestial counterpart to Koala Kong's self-infatuated muscle man disposition, which you can definitely tell that I didn't write all that and that was copied from a different site because I would never write the words self-infatuated muscle man disposition. See, I can't even finish that. That's too many big words for me there. But let's talk about the Funko Pops. Crash Bandicoot in the jetpack, which I will actually mention about the levels that I was playing with the jetpack, which it's actually pretty difficult to control the jetpack. I thought it'd be easier to use than anticipated, and it is difficult, except in the final boss battle, all you did was if you touched Neo Cortex 3 times, you just end up killing him. And that was all. It's probably the easiest boss battle in the entire Crash Bandicoot series, I would assume. I wish with this pop, though, they would have had a base with it where you kind of see like the fire and the smoke like they do with, let's say, like the Mandalorian pops now. I felt like that would have been a little better instead of him just standing there with the jetpack. But it's cool that they made it because, of course, it is a final boss battle version of Crash Bandicoot. Coco Bandicoot, which is cool that we got Coco Bandicoot. I think we didn't get her until the second wave, I believe. They did a pretty decent job for a pop that was made so many years ago with this. She's got the one arm to the side. She's got her computer on the other. You have the makeup on and you have like the detail with the hair and the bow on her head. Really cool. Obviously, they had to make a Coco Bandicoot pop. It just definitely made sense. And I wouldn't mind more Coco Bandicoot variants in the future. And then we got Tiny Tiger. I think it definitely makes sense because of the fact that Tiny Tiger, I feel like, appears more frequently than all the other villains you see throughout the series. Like, I think Tiny Tiger appears in, I think, 3 of the game, or at least 3 of the games that we're actually going to be talking about in the podcast. It's cool they did that. I love the detail with the teeth, and even his pose is really cool also.
Crash with the jetpack is pretty cool. It was nice to get in that first wave of pops for Crash, these kind of different variants of him, and this one's no exception to that. I think that the kind of mask, like goggle helmet thing, looks good for the pop, and obviously the rest of the outfit with the jetpack on. Coco Bandicoot, of course, was one of those pops where when I seen it was coming out and I seen it in the stores, you gotta buy it, especially for a Crash collection. This pop is great. The pose isn't the best, but overall, the pop has got a lot of different details that make it so great. This whole lineup, like all of the Crash pops, are so well done, and this one definitely follows the same trend as that. I do really like the pose, but I think it would be cool to maybe later on see some different Coco Bandicoots, like you had said. And then Tiny Tiger, of course, is really awesome. The pose is great for this. I think they couldn't have done much better for a pose, I think. And obviously with that mouth and just the head sculpt in general is it's almost breathtaking, this pop. I mean, for when it came out, when we weren't really seeing a lot of stuff like this pop wise, this was amazing. There's a lot of different cool details that have gone into make this pop just one of those pops that is just almost a perfect pop.
Now we're going to be talking about the third Crash Bandicoot game, also known as Crash Bandicoot Warped, which actually I think in Europe it was just simply called Crash Bandicoot 3, I'm pretty sure. But here in North America, we call it Crash Bandicoot Warped, which was released exactly 1 year later from the second game on October 31st, 1998 by Naughty Dog on the PlayStation. And of course, once again, it is a platform single player game. Remember when Crash crushed the Cortex Vortex? Well, it plummeted down to a tropical mountain. The Crash unleashes Uka Uka, the boss of Dr. Neo Cortex. He isn't very happy now that Cortex has failed twice. Then Uka thinks of something. He wants to rule the planet in time. He gets help from an old buddy, Dr. Nefarious Tropy. He is the creator of the Time Twister. The Time Twister will allow Cortex to find the gems and crystals in their original places. Coco creates her own time warp chambers so her and Crash can get to the gems and crystals first. But will they make it? Only time will tell.
The third game is awesome as well. And crazily enough, I didn't play this game till like 2015, I feel like it was. It was maybe around there. It could have even been 2016 until I played Warped when I had purchased it. And now I have almost every Crash game in my collection. But Warped was really cool. It was pretty different considering like you have the motorcycle. It definitely showed that this game was evolving and there was going to be different things that they could do besides just your basic platforming.
Crash Bandicoot Warped, I actually did not play until literally a few months ago when I was preparing for this podcast. And I can honestly say that this game is my absolute favorite Crash Bandicoot game that I've ever played. Way too much fun. The levels are not as difficult as the 2 previous games. There are some difficulties on some of the levels, like some of the motorcycle riding levels were a little bit difficult, but it wasn't like I'm going to rage quit difficult. I really enjoyed the Coco and Pura riding levels that you do throughout the game. And I feel like that was much better by a long shot than Crash with the Hog in the first game and the crash with the polar bear on the second game. And then, of course, we can't go wrong about discussing a huge, I guess, plot twist of finding out about Aku Aku's brother, Uka Uka, who basically, I guess you can really say he's actually the main villain of this instead of Neo Cortex. It's more of a focus on Uka Uka than it is Neo Cortex. So now we're going to talk about the Crash Bandicoot 3 Warped, or, well, I mean, I should have just said Warped, but I guess I said the European title also, of the Funko Pops, which kicking off with the Biker Crash Bandicoot, which was a Hot Topic exclusive. Of course, you see Crash Bandicoot in various levels throughout the game with this attire driving a motorcycle. Then we got ourselves Scuba Crash Bandicoot, which was in that second wave with Coco Bandicoot and Aku Aku, which is seen in various underwater levels throughout the game in this attire. And then the last pop to fit this game is the Fake Crash Bandicoot, which is an EB Games in Canada and GameStop in the US exclusive, which this version of Crash Bandicoot isn't actually playable, but it is an Easter egg in the game that appears to do the crash dance in various levels after you've collected all the gems and crystals, which he isn't playable until Crash Team Racing, which we will be discussing about as the next game after. Crash Bandicoot on the motorcycle. I have a much better appreciation for this pop now that I've played Warped than I did before I played Warped. I love the posing with Crash Bandicoot where he's got the one finger out and then he's wearing the glasses and everything. My only gripe is that this should have been done as a Pop Rides. I mean, the whole level is Crash Bandicoot riding a motorcycle. Why didn't they add a motorcycle to make it a Pop Rides for this pop? I just don't know why they didn't do that and just went with a singular one, but I still like this variant, and it's one of my favorite Crash Bandicoot pops. Scuba Crash Bandicoot, which once again, one of my favorite levels in the game where you get to go underwater. And there's actually a machine, which would have been cool as a Pop Deluxe to make this, but I'm not making that as a gripe, where you kind of shoot certain like boxes being covered by seaweed. And the only way you can access the boxes is by shooting the seaweed to get it off of there. So I like that. And especially when there's like Nitro crates and TNT boxes in the way, you can still use that to actually explode them. So you're able to get all of the boxes if you're trying to get the 100% complete level for the boxes and you get the gems for that. Once again, it's the same thing I'm going to say with Biker Crash. I have more appreciation for this now than I did previously. And then Fake Crash Bandicoot. Yeah, when I was playing Warped, I could not find Fake Crash Bandicoot in the game. And I was like, well, I read up he's in number 3, but then finding out he is an Easter egg, I'm like, okay, that kind of makes sense. I felt like for this pop, though, I felt like there could have been a different character in that slot instead of Fake Crash. Like Fake Crash could have been possibly, let's say, an E3 exclusive and not just like taking up a space of a normal exclusive. Like this could have been a new character. Like what if we got like Dingo Dial, which makes his debut in the third game? I don't know why they chose Fake Crash out of anything, but it's still a cool looking pop, especially because I obtained it for only $5 at EB Games during their $5 sales.
Yeah, first things first is the biker outfit Crash definitely should have been a Pop Rides, but that's literally the only gripe I have with this pop. Besides that, this pop is awesome. I mean, he looks so cool with that pose, even though it's just a subtle change from his kind of normal, like OG pop pose. It just looks great. I love the way the sunglasses are and the biker outfit itself. But yeah, it would have been so cool to see him on the bike itself. The scuba gear Crash is pretty cool as well. With the original lineup we got of the Crash Pops of these different Crashes, it was really nice to see some of the different outfits rather than, I don't know what else they could have done besides maybe having Neo Cortex and maybe Coco Bandicoot come out in that first wave. But the different outfits was awesome, and the scuba gear is just like the other ones where they're a lot different, and it's a great example of the different level types in the Crash games. And then Fake Crash, this is a pretty cool pop. It was kind of a weird one to see. I think this was the last one that I had picked up in the lineup. And I think it was also when EB Games had their $5 deal. I ended up picking it up because I couldn't really pass on it at that point. But yeah, they definitely could have put something else in this selection. And then instead of getting that black and white pop in the original wave, if this would have been the chase, that would have been insane. It would have been one of the greatest chases of a long time, obviously. Back then, a chase like that would have just been insane, in my opinion. And I think that's a fitting word to use. But overall, Fake Crash is a really cool pop, and I am glad that we got it eventually.
Are you looking for great pop protectors? Then look no further than popbox.ca. They have a variety of 4-inch and 6-inch protectors in different quantities. Do you want to get 10 protectors, 20? You can get even up to 250 pop protectors over on popbox.ca. And also use our promo code of Funko Popcast for 10% off of your entire purchase of pop protectors. The code is going on until supplies last. So go get your pop protector needs now over on popbox.ca using our code of Funko Popcast to get 10% off and also free shipping over $75 in both Canada and the US with duty fees included.
And let me tell you guys, we're not just screwing around here. These are some great pop protectors. We own a multitude of these protectors. They are some of the best I've seen. Stop buying from EB Games. I'm not boycotting EB Games by any means, but their pop protectors are not as good. So again, use code Funko Popcast for 10% off.
All right, so moving on now, we have ourselves Crash Team Racing, or we're kind of mixing two games together because there was the re-release known as Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled, which depending on the title of the game, so let's say it's just Crash Team Racing, it would have released October 19th, 1999 by Naughty Dog on the PlayStation. And of course, this was the first ever racing genre game for Crash Bandicoot, and it was single and multiplayer. Or Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled. And the reason I'm saying that is because we have two pops and they kind of go together for this. Released June 21st, 2019 by Activision this time on the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch. Crash Bandicoot and his friends and foes are preparing to enter a kart racing tournament. Unfortunately, a space alien named Nitrous Oxide travels from far out space to Earth and offers a challenge to his inhabitants. He claims to be the fastest racer in the entire galaxy who travels the stars looking for creatures to test his skills. Nitrous Oxide challenges them to a game that he calls Survival of the Fastest and explains the rules. Oxide races against the best racer on Earth. If Oxide wins, he will turn the entire globe into a concrete parking lot and make Earth's inhabitants his slaves forever. But if Earth's drivers win, Oxide promises to leave the miserable little rock alone. Now, I know for you, MD, you actually got Nitro Fueled when it came out, I'm pretty sure. But I don't know how much you played of it, because I remember you mentioned you only played a little bit of it.
Yeah, I did buy it when it came out, and yeah, I have only played a little bit of it. I kind of picked it up, and I think at the time I wasn't really feeling it, so I put it back down. And I mean, it's been a while now, and I still haven't picked it back up. So maybe that's something I'm going to do when I end up setting up my new video game setup, which is coming very soon. I'll definitely have to give that game a try because I haven't really heard anything bad about it per se.
Yeah, I think Crash Team Racing or Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled, whatever you want to call it, whether you played the 1999 version or 10 years later, essentially, or 20 years later, I should say, in 2019, I say it's an enjoyable game, especially playing multiplayer online against other people. And you can choose your skins, whether you want to be Crash or Coco or Ripperoo or different characters throughout the series. I think that's really cool. And you're able to create your own cart and change the skins, like I mentioned. It's cool, but it doesn't have that nostalgic feel of playing Mario Kart Double Dash. But at the same time, I feel like people can argue about that because Crash Team Racing actually released before Mario Kart Double Dash. But at the same time, I wouldn't be able to know whether Mario Kart had the same things that you see in Double Dash beforehand. So maybe it was Crash that took the idea from Mario Kart, or Double Dash took the idea from Crash Team Racing. I don't play it too often, and I tried playing like the storylines, but like you constantly have to get first place in order to move on to the next race. And it's just like, But we're going to be talking about the pops for this, which there are only two that fit the theme of this game, which we got ourselves Nitrous Oxide, which I don't really think I should explain who he is because I technically already did. He's coming to Earth. He's challenging the racer. I pretty much summed it up already. And then we have ourselves for Nitro Fuel, which is why I mentioned that because it shows on the box is Crash Bandicoot Pop rides in his cart, which I basically said what it is. It's Crash Bandicoot in his cart. But kicking off with Nitrous Oxide, I remember when this was announced and I was really disappointed about this pop being released. I understand they released it in time for the release of the remastered Crash Team Racing, also known as Nitro Fueled. But there's a couple gripes. One, I would have rather loved to see a different villain been made before Nitrous Oxide. I would have rather had someone else. And number two, the whole thing is Crash Team Racing. Why wasn't this a Pop Rides? This should have been in his little space hovercraft as terms to a Pop Rides. I don't know why they did just a singular 4-inch pop, in my opinion. I think it's decent with the way that they applicated the different colors, and the eyes are really cool on this too, where you have yellow and then orange in the background there. Then we got ourselves the Crash Bandicoot in the Cart Pop Rides, which this thing is amazing. In our top 50 list for the year of 2019, as terms to Funko Pops, we put this on the list, and I think it actually made it super high up, like in the top 10, maybe even in the top 5 portion of that list out of 50 pops. And it explains it all. The detail is great. You got Crash sticking his tongue out, and he's got his one leg out too, because that's usually what happens when you play as Crash and you're able to do the little jump after the ramp, is that he kind of lifts his leg up and kind of does like a cool pose in midair, which is really cool that they did this. And I love the colors they used here with the blue and the orange for the cart. I think that works out perfectly because those are kind of like the main colors, I would say, for Crash Bandicoot overall. We even seen it later on with the Funko Soda figure, where if you got the Chase figure, the Pog has orange and blue, which are really nice colors to go well together.
Nitrous oxide is definitely an interesting looking pop. I mean, it really is kind of weird considering that like it's a racing game, and he also kind of looks like Sebulba from Star Wars The Phantom Menace, which is obviously a pod racer. They have really similar designs, I guess, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I do enjoy the character design, and the way the pop turned out is pretty cool as well. Oh yeah, one thing I wanted to mention is that the nostalgia thing that you were talking about, nostalgia and when the games came out, I guess, are two different things. I feel like a lot more people are nostalgic about Double Dash because arguably that's the greatest, maybe even like kart racing game of all time, but definitely the best Mario Kart game. By a lot of people would say that. Obviously, the first Mario Kart came out years prior to the first Crash racing game. So I would say that they kind of took their design of a racing game, but it doesn't really matter because so many different racing games have come out, let's say with like Diddy Kong Racing and all that since then as well. So with the Crash in the cart, I do own this pop. I actually was lucky enough to be in the States at a GameStop and they had it, and I was super excited to see that they had one of them because this was a pop I knew I needed. And out of the box, this thing is just amazing. Like you had talked about with the hose of the leg sticking out and he's kind of standing on the cart. His tongue's out. The facial expression is amazing. Even his hair is kind of flowing in the wind a little bit compared to some of the other Crash Pops that you see where it's kind of just parted to one side. This thing is awesome. The only gripe I have about it is that inside the box, it's sideways. So for me, that just looks weird. This is one of those Pops that I put the box in storage and I display this out of box. And I'm kind of glad that I do it that way because God, is it ever awesome.
All right, so now we're going to move on to the last game that we are going to be discussing about for this podcast. And honestly, I did not think we were going to be talking about this game on this podcast until they announced the pop for it. And that is for Crash Bandicoot 4, It's About Time. The newest Crash Bandicoot game released, at least for a console game. I know there's the mobile game that just recently released, On the Run, but this is Crash Bandicoot 4, It's About Time, released October 2nd, 2020. So not even a year yet that this game has released. Released by Activision this time, and it was released on the PS4, Xbox One, Nintendo Switch, PS5, Xbox Series S/X, and Windows PC. Of course, it is a platform game, but it is both single and multiplayer. Following their defeat at the hands of Crash Bandicoot in Crash Bandicoot Warped, Uka Uka attempts to liberate himself and Doctors Neo, Cortex, and Nefarious Tropi from their prison in the past. His latest effort rips open a hole in the fabric of space and time and causes him to pass out. Cortex and Entropi swiftly escape, abandoning Uka Uka, and discover that the rift they use links their universe to the rest of the multiverse and decide to make use of it to conquer all dimensions. To ensure success, the pair create a generator capable of opening other space-time rifts and recruit aid from Doctors Engine and Nitrous Brio to provide an army in anticipation of their enemies' interference. Meanwhile, Aku Aku, Uka Uka's older twin brother, senses the disturbance in space and time and quickly rushes Crash to Insanity Peak. Upon arriving, he comes across Lani Loli, whom Aku Aku recognizes as one of the quantum masks, 4 ancient witch doctor masks that have great power over space and time and who would only appear if something has opened up in the multiverse. Lonnie spots a rift and suspects there is trouble, leading to Crash and his sister Coco agreeing to follow him across the multiverse and find the other quantum mass while combating the chaos Cortex is creating. Now, I'm going to assume for you, MD, you have not played this game yet, so you have nothing really to discuss about, question mark?
Yeah, this is actually the only Crash game that I haven't ever touched. Like, there's obviously more games like that we haven't talked about in this podcast, like I said, with Twin Sanity, Wrath of Cortex, even Crash Batch, which is an amazing kind of party game. And there's also a few other titles, but I've played at least some of all of those games, and this new one I have not played.
I actually purchased this game recently because I felt like I needed to prepare for this podcast by actually playing the game, since we do have a Crash Bandicoot 4 pop to talk about. And I can say, first of all, the graphics are great. And it's just crazy to see what Crash looks like. Some of the characters look a little off, like Neo Cortex looks a little weird, and some of the other villains. But I think like your main ones like Crash and Coco and Aku Aku looks pretty much the same, because how can you really update just a simple design like Aku Aku for the game? But there are a lot of new features, including the different mask abilities, which is what involves with the Funko Pop we will be discussing about. And I think they're all pretty good in their own ways. There's actually new modes to play. So there is retro mode, which is your regular, you play the game. If you die 3 times, then you got to restart to the beginning. But there's actually now modern mode, which is what I've been doing, which if you die, it brings you back to the last checkpoint instead of having to restart again. And they also count how many times you die during the game, because there's also like a way to get a gem is if you do it within 3 games and complete it, then you get a gem for that. There's getting 100% of the boxes, 60%, 80%. And then there's also hidden gems that count too. And when you get all the gems, you get different skins. A lot of people have been mentioning before I started playing this that this is the hardest game of all time as terms to difficulty. And I can honestly 100% back that up. This game is so difficult on so many levels. There's just, they've made it so much harder to collect all the boxes to get 100%. And the mask abilities, sometimes you got to be really quick with them. And I can say, if I were to rank the games that we talked about today, I can say that I don't like this game more than Crash 1 and especially Crash 3, which was my favorite, but I do like this better than Crash 2 and Crash Team Racing, just because you get that nostalgic feel of the original Crash Bandicoot game. You have some cool abilities, but you also have the difficulties that I mentioned about Crash Bandicoot 2, where I basically wanted to rage quit. But we're going to talk about the Funko Pop involved in this, which is the Crash Bandicoot in Mass Armor, which was a FunCon 2021 shared with Walmart in both Canada and the US exclusive, which Crash Bandicoot uses various mass armors that give him different abilities throughout the game. The mask used in this pop specifically is from the mask that's called Kupuna Wa, which the mask's ability is to slow down time and make it faster for Crash to move from one spot to the other. Which for this pop, this is pretty cool. I was really excited to see the return of Crash Bandicoot Funko Pops, because we haven't seen Crash Bandicoot Funko Pops since the wave they did with like Nitrous Oxide and the Pop Rides. And I think Tiny Tiger was in that wave in 2019. And then, of course, we had the Funko Sodas releasing earlier in the year this year. But we now have the return of Funko Pops, and I'm hoping they make a new wave of Crash Bandicoot Pops, considering this year is the 25th anniversary. This is really cool. I love the detail involved with this mask armor, and the detail even on the back of the pop, which of course you can't see, but I mean, MD actually just got the pop in the mail, so he'll be able to see the detail in the back of the box, or the back of the pop, I should say, where you actually have the one mask that's involved there on the back, and the detail on that is really cool also. I thoroughly enjoy, I guess I can say, the different mask abilities. If they were to choose a masked attire for this, I felt like it should have been the one with Lonnie Lowly, just because he was kind of like a pretty cool mask in the game. And I felt like also because he's such a nice bright color of blue that they could have also pulled off making the pop glow in the dark in that case, and then make it the FunCon exclusive. And then they could have done maybe this version as a common release.
Yeah, I'm actually holding this pop in my hand right now, looking at it. And the first thing I'm going to say is the mask on the back looks so cool. I really enjoy how that looks. But overall, this Funko Pop is also amazing. I love the pose of this figure. I kind of wish this was sort of the pose that we had gotten with the original Crash Pop, because I feel like that's kind of the pose you picture him in when you see him kind of at the start of the level. He's kind of got his hands kind of doing a weird movement to his sides where he's kind of breathing, I guess, after running so hard and spinning. And I think that's exactly what this pop looks like. And overall, the costume is really interesting and really cool. I love the fact that they added the mask on the back of this pop. It really goes a long way. And I honestly didn't even know about that until just now. And it's really neat. I really enjoyed that they did that. And yeah, like you said, if this was glow in the dark, that would have been really cool. And then they could have just done obviously this pop as the common version, and then obviously the FunCon exclusive being the glow in the dark, which I think would have been a good idea. But I hope for sure we see some more Crash Pops down the road, because this one's great. And I mean, it's really heavy. It's a really heavy Funko Pop.
All right, so now we're going to move on to the last segment that we always do for these fandom related podcasts. And that's essentially what Funko Pops we want to see next in said fandom, which in this case, what Funko Pops we want to see next in the Crash Bandicoot lineup, which I will say for mine, because I know most likely MD will have a bunch of newer characters for his list of Funko Pops, that I chose only 2 newer characters and then 3 different variants of already existing characters. Coco and Purah Pop Rides, where you actually have kind of like what they did with the Skeletor on Panther for Masters of the Universe, but it's Coco and Purah for Crash Bandicoot. And I think that would be really cool. Another one is Engine. I think Engine is one of those, he was one of my favorite villains in the Crash Bandicoot series. And I feel like it would be really easy compared to a lot of the characters to actually make, just because you can easily take 80% of the Dexter's Laboratory mold and use it for Engine, and then just add different pieces, whether it's a different arm and then like his mask, like face mask type gimmick. And then you can actually have this pop have 2 different eye colors, where you have the black eye on the one side, and then where the mask is, you can have a white eye, because I know Engine, I'm pretty sure, has like 2 different color eyes. So it would be cool if they did it that way for the pop. Ripperoo. This is honestly my favorite villain that I've been wanting Funko to make in Pops. And it's weird that they haven't yet. They did do those, like, not mystery minis, but like minis from Crash Team Racing. And you actually have Ripperoo in the cart. So Funko clearly knows about Ripperoo, but for some reason they never made a pop. And I think I wouldn't really care what version they did, because he had 2 different looks. Angel Crash. Now, what I mean by that is that if you play the game, whenever you die, Crash becomes like an angel and he like flies up. But you also could make this pop translucent, is what I have this listed. So it wouldn't be just a white paint. It would be translucent, and you'd have the angel halo over that. I think that'd be a really cool variant of Crash Bandicoot. And then last but not least, overall on this list, I don't know why Funko has not done this yet, and they haven't really updated on this lineup of pops, and that is a Lights and Sounds Aku Aku. When you hit the box for a 3rd time, Aku Aku flashes different colors, and there's a very fast bongo/drum beat, and that'd be wicked if you got this Lights and Sounds Aku Aku, where you press a button and it flashes the different colors as the lights portion, and the sounds portion is the fast drum beat. I think that'd be so amazing for an Aku Aku variant.
Okay, so I actually have 12 different pops listed down. I don't know if you want me to say all of those.
You can.
To start off, I have a 4-pack, which would be really cool. And that would be the 4 elemental masks from the Wrath of Cortex, which is Rocco, Wawa, Pyro, and Lolo. I think doing these as separate pops, I don't think is something that would actually happen. But I think if it was a 4-pack and maybe even exclusive to a con, I think that would be great. And I could see Funko actually doing it. Second on the list here, I have arguably the pop I want to see the most in the Crash Bandicoot lineup, and that is Crunch Bandicoot. Such a great character. I really loved the levels that he was in the Wrath of Cortex, and I think he definitely needs a Funko Pop. Then I have a 2-pack, and that would be the Komodo brothers. I think their Funko Pops would look great, and it would kind of introduce the first 2-pack to the Crash lineup. Then I have, of course, Uka Uka, which I'm surprised we haven't seen this pop yet to begin with, because it could have easily been maybe the pop that replaced the fake Crash. We got Uka Uka instead, which would just make a lot of sense. Then I have Dingo Dial. I'm surprised we haven't seen him either yet. I mean, a lot of these characters, it's like, wow, why haven't they continued to produce Crash Pops? Because a lot of these characters definitely deserve a pop. Then I have Dr. Engine, and I think that this would be a really cool looking pop as well. I mean, there's such great characters designs for some of these Crash villains and such that I think it would be really interesting to see pops of them. And to go right along with that is Nitrous Brio, and not only having that, but having a Chase version where he's kind of in his like muscle form, while where he's kind of huge and just ripped. I think that would be really cool, even though the Chase would be a total different mold. I think it would go great that way. Then I have Ripper Roo, which is another one of those characters like Dingo Dial, which just makes sense to have a Funko Pop, and I'm surprised we haven't seen it. Then I have kind of the first Crash Bandicoot on this list, and that is Crash with Polar. It would be a pop and buddy. I think that's the best way to get a Polar pop, is to have it be a buddy. And we could kind of see a new pose on a Crash pop, which, like I said, with the newest one we've seen for Crash 4, maybe a pose like that, but where he's in his kind of normal attire of just the jean shorts. And then I have Coco Bandicoot with Purah, which I think makes sense as well to be a pop and buddy. That would be great. And again, I think it might be the only way that we'd see a Purah pop. Then I have Crash in his mech suit from the Wrath of Cortex. I think that would be an interesting looking pop. And we recently seen a pop that would be very similar to this, and that was the I forget the character name, but it was from the Alien lineup where the character was in that yellow mech suit. And I think that the Crash Bandicoot would be very similar to that, where it's kind of a 6-inch pop. And last but not least, I have a Pop Rides. And no, it is not Biker Crash. It is Crash in his plane, which is one of the levels from Wrath of Cortex, where you kind of have to fly a plane around in the sky and you shoot down. I forget what they are. They're kind of like satellites or something like that. And I think that would be a really cool pop ride, which would be also pretty large. And I feel like we haven't seen a pop ride of a plane for any kind of franchise in quite some time.
But anyways, guys, that is going to be the end of this fandom-related podcast on Crash Bandicoot. If you enjoyed this podcast, make sure you smash that like button. Comment in the comment section below and let us know what your favorite pops are from the Crash Bandicoot lineup, and let us know what characters do you want to see next in the Crash Bandicoot lineup. Press that subscribe button for more content like this podcast and any other videos we do on this channel in the future, and press the little bell to be notified of when that future content gets released. And if you guys haven't yet, follow us on all of our social media platforms on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at A Funko Podcast. It'll be listed in the description below. But anyways, guys, thank you for listening to this fandom-related podcast on Crash Bandicoot, and we hope to see you guys next week on A Funko Podcast. 1, 2, 3, I'm out of here.
Peace in, peace out.